Right, good evening ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another Propagandacast. Lehr, sorry for the slight period with nothing. Had to sort of redo things after, well, the patch coming and all sorts of things. I was already had to take stock, then replays came, then I lost them, then replays came again, and I was already slowly working my way towards that. Anyways, we're off here to have our first episode, the Conscripts. I mean, the Conscripts really have taken some changes here with the last patch. They all of a sudden have now one considerable advantage over the Grenadiers, which is they have more health than them. Previously, Grenadiers and Way partly through armor had essentially what was equivalent of the equal amount of same health as the Conscripts. Now Conscripts, on the other hand, do have the overall advantage in health. They do less damage, which is certainly unfortunate, but overall they do more damage. Of course, at the same time, that does of course mean there are some slight things of sort of how to engage Grenadiers and other enemy troops. And of course, depending on what you're engaging, you want to sort of stay at different ranges. For example, here, when you're dealing with Pioneers or close quarters troops, I mean, you want to stay at range. And of course, in that department, the Pioneers overall don't stand much chance, even if they were to close in. In this case, they're for some reason standing at range, but overall, I mean, you actually have a decent chance of doing something nasty to your erstwhile opponent.
We have the point.
And of course, it also means all of a sudden an ability they have, but really hasn't seen much usage. It's the sandbag fighting position, which means, oh hey, I can plop down heavy cover wherever I want to. That's actually now all of a sudden a much bigger advantage, in particular if then proceed to wire it off, denying it to your opponent. And there we go, sandbags going down. All of a sudden, once this is done, these conscripts will have quite an advantage. In particular, well, there's a bit there, but overall not. Otherwise, a lot of heavy cover. So all of a sudden, this is an ability that's gained a lot of premium. But previously you barely saw it. Now it's going to be massively important for your conscripts, because again, now they have the ability to plonk down heavy cover to your advantage when there's not necessarily any otherwise. But again, they're not as strong as Grenadiers, so what does this mean overall? I mean, you generally want to fight with the conscripts in your advantage, which all means you don't just bloody well run at the Grenadiers, that's for sure. Otherwise you're generally not going to hurt them well. It also means, of course, trying to sort of flank the Grenadiers, and again, flanking does not mean running straight up to the opponent. It seems like something it is, it's slightly different. Flanking means, getting up to the opponent where cover doesn't apply, and then shooting out from that angle, because again, cover is directional right here, and this is using another squad though, but this is what you call flanking. Of course, I'll probably have to make a more specific video on that. We have one squad here, keeping the attention, basically fixing the enemy squad, and what does happen here? Combat engineers, and again this is about conscripts, still feel like I'll just pop this in just for a bit of extra service, flanks up here, and again the conscripts sort of have more health, and again the guns can do more damage, but overall well handled. Again the conscripts sort of outlast that, in particular again if the opponent's not in heavy cover. Of course, if the gun needs to have heavy cover, you're generally off better, so again trying to flank them. It's sort of about that. You sort of need to figure out when to flank, when to engage, when to hold your ground, and right here of course we see flanking going on.
Infantry shooting at us!
And of course, this results in the Grenadiers falling back. So, I mean, there's a lot of sort of more tools going on here. Of course, you also have the merge ability, which again has a bit of premium to it now. Again, and just like the previous video, I'm not entirely sure if it's actually canned, so I'll just call this part 2 to sort of explain on, because it still has a lot of the core values, I suppose. Anyways, we'll sort that out. Otherwise, again, merge still good. And again, allowed to keep up things going here. Again, good in ensuring that, for example, more veteran units can be preserved and kept at the front line, so always a good little ability to have. But overall, again, consider this again with the conscripts. More health than the Grenadiers, doesn't quite have the same amount of damage to that. I mean, particularly at long range, the Grenadiers will have a slight advantage, but again, then it's where maneuvering and sort of using the terrain comes into advantage. Again, the heavy cover, in particular, you can create heavy cover with as little to none for your opponent, and then again, you can then lay down barbed wire to further deny him it. And all of a sudden, you've got a bit more of an advantage, don't you? And overall, what this means also is the conscripts basically though with the same, they've got to get, I mean, they have gained a damage bonus themselves, essentially, after the last patch. I mean, any unit basically tries to charge at them and usually suffer quite a few casualties, unless somehow their terrain actually working to their advantage. So that's a little something to keep in mind. They're overall still a pretty effective unit, though again, you can't quite pull off the same tactics you could previously, which largely amounted to running straight up to your opponent, then beating him up close. Sure, you'll still to some extent have the advantage up close, but again, your advantage now is more, you have more health on it, so it's better about sort of, how to get the most out of your health towards your opponent and killing him that way. So that is something to keep in mind. And again, the usual tactic of just running straight up and molotoving is a much more risky tactic now. And certainly I'm also seeing a lot of less players currently using Molotovs, but overall, I mean, be careful of that. More about choosing terrain properly, flanking, engaging, knowing when to retreat, and knowing when to not. Again, we see it taking up position, though again, right here, note, it doesn't really cover. This is a bit of a bad position, in fact, for Obscura. Now we see he's getting flanked himself. Soft, though again, finding this angle is not going to do much. It's more like flank from here, if you will. So, I mean, right here, this is a bad engagement for your Conscripts. This is a bad engagement. In fact, he should just pull out of there. And again, that's going to be more important now, you know, knowing when to hold your ground, knowing when to retreat. And there we go, Conscripts down.
We're builders, not killers.
There's a lot, of course, lessons to be learned. A lot of new tactics to be taught. Again, like advancing through cover, using natural master advantage, using true sight to mask your troops as well, sort of allowing them to avoid fire. I mean, if you can overall get your Conscripts, of course, they'll actually have the advantage. Because again, then they'll easily damage them to a certain extent, but also have more health. And of course, another thing to remember about Conscripts versus Grenadiers is one Grenadier down, that's 1/4 of the squad's damage down. One Conscript down, that's 1/6. I mean, already in that, there's also a few vital differences. And of course, you know, don't charge at Grenadiers without machine guns with them. That's going to end in tears. Let's just keep it at that. Let's just keep it at that. But again, you know, merging good. Knowing when to retreat is good. Flanking, sandbags, good. Anti-tank grenades always helpful. Molotovs, currently perhaps not quite as grand because again they do quite a bit closer and it's always not quite as easy to do that. Though again, it's quite a more use of true vision and that way not the opponent not seeing it to get close. So there's a lot more to that now than previously. But overall, rule of thumb, don't just blindly charge your opponent, seek cover, get up some more units. Again, Conscripts are more about numbers, then that way try to outflank your opponent, that way beat him. I repeat, that way. You can still pull off human wave attacks if you want, but, you know, expect massive casualties then, just like in the actual war. So hopefully with this little video, things might have become a bit clearer on how to get the most out of your Conscripts, how to do damage with them, how to make your opponents cry, or at least have some respect for your Conscripts, because again, I mean, they're not quite as straightforward as they used to be, but they're hardly bad. It just requires, you know, realizing their strengths and playing to that while trying to sort of minimize the Grenadier strengths. And again, the Grenadier's primary weakness is they don't have a lot of health. So again, if you can angle your Conscripts correctly, get off a few good shots there, you can easily bring down a Grenadier squad. Conversely, again, if you just choose to fight on the Grenadier's advantage, you're quickly going to bleed out. So try and keep that in mind. So hopefully people will have a clear idea of now how to get the most out of your Conscripts, how to get greater strength. Again, sandbags, lovely now. And of course, augmenting that with a bit of barbed wire to deny opponent cover is also great. Be careful about engaging your opponent at different ranges and try to get within the optional ranges for either enemy. But again, you know, try to do so while not under fire if possible. Again, with Grenadiers, you want to get closer, but without, you know, getting shot at all the time. With Pioneers, you want to get farther away. That's sort of it, really. And again, if you can sort of then negate their advantages there, you can usually gun them down. And again, both have the amount of health, so overall, I mean, they are, in terms of durability, much weaker than your Conscripts. But again, fighting at either favourable range, they will beat the snot out of you. So, this is Imperial Lane saying cheers, and see you wonderful people tomorrow.